This is Vijay and Ganapati from MuleSoft product management team, sharing what's latest in Anypoint Partner Manager. Release 221 from January 2025 enables you to create multiple inbound message flows for the same partner and message type, both EDI and non-EDI, to apply different data transformation mapping and to deliver the translated data to different target endpoints based on partner identifiers. Inbound AS2 endpoints can now be optionally managed with API Manager for additional security and policy enforcement. Outbound AS2 endpoints can now be configured with transfer mode settings such as chunked and identity transfers. Partner Manager now supports some of the oldest XML versions such as 2001, 2, 3, 2040, the most recent 8050, and Edifact Syntax version 1. Partner Manager now supports all runtime fabric deployment options provided by the MuleSoft Anypoint platform. Outside of the core product features, the monitoring utilities templates published in Anypoint Exchange provide reference implementations for the most common B2B operational monitoring workflows such as error notifications, acknowledgement overdue and rejection monitoring, and certificate expiration monitoring. Release 222 from April 2025 introduces CloudHub 2 as one of the newest deployment target for Partner Manager runtime plane. Minimum Mule version can now be configured with 4.5 for organizations that want to leverage Partner Manager to natively process cXML messages. With the new managed deployment experience, you can easily apply changes made to environment settings such as the runtime and minimum Mule version, vCore configurations, ActiveMQ connection details for RTF deployments, and more to all your runtime applications with a single click of a button. SFTP and FTP inbound endpoints can now be configured to optionally skip the deletion of source files when you are picking files from SFTP or FTP servers that do not allow users to explicitly delete files. AS2 and HTTP send endpoint URLs can now include static query parameters. The new XML receive setting configurations will help control the content in the acknowledgement sent back to your trading partners, and with how the XML read output is presented to the transformation layer, improving the overall EDI interoperability with your trading partner ecosystem. Let's now see most of the new features in action with a simple demonstration. Mythical is a fictional appliances manufacturing company, and Technocraft is one of Mythical's suppliers, sending EDI XML 810 invoices through an AS2 connection with basic authentication. Mythical has configured Partner Manager with CloudHub 2 as the deployment target, and internally Mythical has two lines of business: distribution and parts. Invoices received from suppliers like Technocraft for the distribution business, identified by the XML ISA receiver ID, are to be translated into the cXML invoice detail message and sent to the supplier invoice API with specific static query parameters. Invoices for the parts business are to be translated into an internal CSV message structure and delivered to an SFTP location for internal consumption by the parts department. This demo covers all the key features introduced in the recent Partner Manager releases, and let's go check them out. First, we will see how Mythical's Anypoint platform administrators have set up their environment to deploy Partner Manager runtime services to CloudHub 2 as the deployment target. In Access Management, under Business Groups, we are navigating into the business group where we want to set Partner Manager up, and go to the Partner Manager tab where we have the QA environment set to deploy to CloudHub 2 as the deployment target type. Let's review the configuration of this environment. In the deployment target type selection drop-down menu, we now have CloudHub 2 added as an additional option besides CloudHub 1 and Runtime Fabric. When CloudHub 2 is selected as the runtime deployment target type, you can select runtime version, which in this case is 4.6, and minimum Mule version override is set to 4.5 because we want to use the cXML features. And we have selected the US West Oregon as the shared space deployment target, If your organization has a private space configured in CloudHub 2, you can select the private space as a deployment target. When the environment is configured in access management and when the users have the necessary permissions, they can navigate into the environment and are able to see CloudHub 2 is set as the deployment target. Let's now check out how Mythical has configured their inbound AS2 endpoint to be managed using Anypoint API Manager for policy enforcement and basic authentication. The first step in enabling this is to create a HTTP API instance ID in API Manager in the environment where you are deploying Partner Manager from. We have an AS2 inbound API instance with the type of HTTP. When an API instance is created in API Manager, you have an API instance ID that you would need to configure the AS2 endpoint in Partner Manager. So we have just copied this API instance ID. In Anypoint Partner Manager, you would create an AS2 receive from partners endpoint and choose the option to manage with API Manager. And you would be putting in the API instance ID that you copied from API Manager here, and then select the appropriate security level and key store for signature and encryption, which comes as part of the standard AS2 security. In this environment, we already have an AS2 receive from partners endpoint. This endpoint is used in two message flows. When the first message flow using the AS2 or HTTP inbound endpoint is deployed in Partner Manager, Partner Manager automatically deploys a Mule application in the selected runtime plane, which in this case is CloudHub 2. So let's go to Anypoint Runtime Manager and check for this inbound AS2 application. As we see here, this application is actively running in CloudHub 2. When a Mule application with the API instance ID set as the order discovery ID is deployed successfully, it turns the status of that API instance in API Manager to active. In the policy section of the API instance, you can choose a variety of out-of-the-box policies provided by MuleSoft. You can also bring in custom policies that you want to apply. And for this specific API instance, we have applied a client ID enforcement policy where we are expecting the trading partners and consumers of this AS2 inbound endpoint URL to pass the client ID and client secret credentials through the HTTP basic authentication header of the incoming message. Once you have the endpoint ready to receive messages, the next step is to provide your trading partners with the credential that they can use on their site to pass in the client ID and secret in the HTTP basic authentication headers. So to do that, open the API in Anypoint Exchange, where you can request for access and select the instance of the API, create a new client application. So let's say we want to give access for Technocraft to authenticate into the inbound AS2 endpoint. And when you click request access, you get an client ID and secret that they would be using to send the AS2 messages. You can make this a self-service experience for the partners by surfacing the API instance through Anypoint Exchange's public portal or through an API portal hosted on Anypoint API Experience Hub. Note that the basic authentication credentials in this example is an additional layer of security over the standard signature and encryption-based security for AS2 communications. We will now see how Mythical has configured the inbound invoice message flows for their distribution and parts businesses, leveraging the new Identifier-based message routing and cXML features. Technocraft is set up as one of Mythical's trading partners in Anypoint Partner Manager with two message flows. The first message flow is for the distribution invoices and the second one is for the parts invoices. Let's go to the distribution invoice message flow. When an inbound X12 4010 810 message from Technocraft to Mythical's distribution business is received through the API Manager managed AS2 inbound endpoint, Partner Manager automatically routes the message to this configuration, where the X12 data payload is converted into a cXML invoice detail message with a data transformation built in Anypoint Studio. In Anypoint Studio, you would configure the X12 read connector operation with the appropriate X12 version such as 4010 and message type such as 810 for invoices. When that is done, DataWeave automatically renders the structure of your EDI messages on the left side pane as the message source. On the right side, we have configured the cXML invoice detail request as the target. So when you have both your source and target message types set in DataView, developers can expand the EDI segment and data element fields to start performing the appropriate data transformation to convert the EDI message into the appropriate destination message structure, which in this case is the cXML messages. And in cXML, you can use the syntax to populate the doc type declaration tag on the output cXML data payload. DataView also provides a preview of what the translated data looks like as developers start building field level mapping. We can verify that the doc type declaration is appearing in the output payload as defined in the syntax in the mapping. And developers can also use the real-time preview as an option to make sure the translated output looks exactly same as what the supplier invoice API is looking for, improving their overall productivity. When the map is fully built, tested, and validated in Anypoint Studio, you would import that map in the message flow configuration. And the final step in the message flow configuration is to specify how and where to deliver the translated cXML message into, which in this case is the supplier invoice API endpoint with the appropriate query parameters as specified in their specification. So this message flow is ready to process inbound invoices for the distribution business. Let's also check out the invoice message flow for the parts business. On the source section, the configurations are almost identical with the exception of the X12 ISA receiver identifier for the parts message flow. We are applying the routing configuration for this message flow based on the X12 receiver identifier of Mythical's parts business. When a message flow is routed into this message flow, Partner Manager applies this data view transformation to convert the A10 EDI invoice into the supplier invoice CSV format. You would use the same data view experience to produce X12 to CSV message transformation using data view, where you have the 4010 A10 as the source message type and your CSV message structure as your target message type. You can also leverage real-time preview to make sure the generated CSV file looks same as what the parts department's backend integration processes are looking for. Once built and validated, the data view transformation for CSV is imported in the message flow configuration. And in this case, the expectation is to deliver the CSV file into an internal SFTP location with a specific naming convention. So this message flow is also deployed and ready to process messages. Okay, Mythical Appliances is now ready to process invoices from Technocraft for their distribution and parts business. Let's now process some actual transactions and check out the end-to-end experience. The first scenario that we are going to run is to post an AS2 message from Technocraft to Mythical using wrong credential on the AS2 endpoint. So we are using an AS2 client application that receives this EDI data payload, prepares the appropriate AS2 message with proper signature and encryption, and along the way the username and password passed as the client ID and secret from this postman request or sent in the actual AS2 message request to Mythical's AS2 endpoint URL running in CloudHub 2 here. So let's go and see what happens when we send this message with the wrong credentials. As you would have expected, the credentials that we passed in are not correct against the contracts that are established in API Manager instance in Mythical's Anypoint organization. Let's now go and send a message to the same endpoint with the same data payload with the correct AS2 client ID and secret in the basic authentication header through the AS2 client application. Now we received a positive MDN or message disposition notification back from the Partner Manager's AS2 inbound endpoint application. And this also confirms that the basic authentication credential that we passed in on this request are now validated and authenticated through the API management policies enforced in the Partner Manager's AS2 inbound application. Let's now go to Partner Manager and see if that A10 message was processed successfully. Let's go to activity page where you can see all the transactions coming in and going out. At 12:47, when I just sent the postman request with the correct credentials, there is a successfully delivered A10 invoice. And we see that this invoice was received for the Mythical's distribution line of business, where the users can view the incoming EDI data payload. We are translating the EDI A10 message to the cXML invoice detail message structure. We see the cXML message generated with the appropriate doc type declaration tag and other information about the invoice, including all the line items. Let's now copy this transmission ID so we can verify that this invoice was successfully processed all the way through to the supplier invoice API. Go to Anypoint Monitoring, go to the log search and search for this transmission ID. Reverse sort this result, and we see that at 12:47, when we sent the postman request, the inbound AS2 app received this transmission ID, and it further processed to generate and send the MDN response back to the trading partner. And then a bunch of different processing steps happened to validate the X12 message payload, translate the EDI X12 data, and send the translated cXML message to the supplier invoice API. So we can see and trace the transaction all the way from the start to the finish as it navigates and processes from Partner Manager into the process and system API layers in Anypoint platform. Let's now go to the supplier invoice application logs to make sure the query parameters that we were supposed to send were actually sent appropriately. Navigate to the logs of this application, and we see that at 12:47 we received the supplier invoice cXML message from Partner Manager, where we see that the query parameters with the cXML invoice and QA as the environment as configured in the endpoint specification. Let's now send an invoice for the parts business and see how that processes. This message is actually being sent to the Mythical parts business, where we want this to be converted into a CSV file and sent to an SFTP endpoint. Let's go and send it out. We received a successful MDN back. Let's go and see if the message was processed. In the activity, we see a new inbound A10 message. Let's go and check it out. This new A10 transaction was received for the Mythical's parts business through the same endpoint, and we can see the inbound EDI data payload. This message was translated to a CSV message structure. So the transmission looks good. And this translated CSV file was sent to this SFTP supplier invoice folder on an internal SFTP server on this folder. Let's go and see if that file is now available for processing. I'm refreshing my SFTP folder, and I see a new file at 12:52, exactly at the time when this supplier invoice was processed. And let's go and make sure this file looks as we would expect. So it contains all the invoice information from the supplier, and everything looks pretty good. As Partner Manager processes any EDI or non-EDI messages, it also has the ability to extract specific custom message attributes like the invoice number or order number. This also provides the ability for IT and business users to perform search for specific transactions. So if you want to specifically search for a particular invoice number, you can select the appropriate message attribute, search, and you will be taken directly into the message that matches the search criteria. All right, that brings us to the end of this demonstration, where we covered a lot of grounds to showcase some of the latest features that we added in Anypoint Partner Manager in the first quarter of 2025. I hope you found this informative and useful, and please stay tuned for more upcoming innovations and some AI capabilities that are to be delivered in Anypoint Partner Manager in the coming months. Thank you again. Have a good rest of your day.